I built my catering company from the ground up without a single dollar from my family. And for years, my family spent every holiday telling me I was throwing my life away on party food. That's what my brother called it, the Christmas I turned 28, party food. He said it the way people say phase, like it was something I'd eventually outgrow, like a bad haircut or a boyfriend from university. My father laughed. My mother looked at her wine glass. I drove home to my apartment in Kitchener that night with a Tupperware of leftover stuffing I'd brought as my contribution. And I told myself this was the last Christmas I'd cry on the 401. It was not the last Christmas I'd cry on the 401, but that's where this story really starts. Not at the end, when everything collapsed around them, but at the beginning, when they were so sure they had me figured out. My brother is 4 years older than me. He went into real estate in the Greater Toronto area when the market was still forgiving, and by 32 he had 2 investment properties and an air of authority. He wore like a second blazer. He'd married well. His wife came from money, old Oakville money, the kind that didn't talk about itself but let the address do the talking. And somewhere along the way my brother had started confusing access to her family's wealth with having built something himself. Our parents loved him for it. He was the success story. He was the proof that they'd done something right. I was the other one. I'd studied hospitality at Conestoga, which my father referred to as cooking school until I stopped correcting him. I'd worked under a chef in Waterloo for 3 years, then spent 2 more running the kitchen for a mid-sized event company before I decided I was done making other people's visions happen and wanted to make my own. In 2019, I registered my business, Fern Table, a boutique catering company specializing in corporate events, private dining, and seasonal menus sourced from farms within 150 kilometers of Waterloo region. It was exactly what I wanted it to be. Small, intentional, good. My family's response was a kind of sustained indifference broken up by occasional commentary. My mother asked if it was like DoorDash. My brother asked what my exit strategy was. My father asked if I'd considered getting into property management instead. I didn't ask them for anything. I took a small business loan through BDC. I found a commissary kitchen to rent by the hour. I built my client list contact by contact, event by event, Saturday by Saturday for 2 years. By 2021, I had 4 full-time staff and a waiting list. By 2023, I had moved into my own commercial kitchen space in a restored building off King Street, signed a 3-year lease, and secured contracts with 2 tech firms and a regional hospital foundation for their annual galas. I hadn't told my family any of this in detail. We talked to Christmas and birthdays. The conversations were polite and surface level, and I'd learned not to expect more than that. What I hadn't realized was how much they'd been watching from a distance, adding things up in their own way. The call came on a Tuesday in February. It was my brother. He didn't open with hello. He opened with, "Dad and I want to sit down with you. There are some family financial things we need to discuss." Family financial things? I almost asked him to repeat it because the phrasing was so strange. My family didn't have shared finances. We weren't a family business. My parents had their retirement accounts in their house in Cambridge. My brother had his properties. I had my company. There was nothing to discuss. "What kind of financial things?" I said. "It's better in person," he said. "Can you come Saturday?" I said yes because I still, after everything, defaulted to yes when it came to my family. Old habit. Oldest habit. I drove to my parents' house in Cambridge on a grey February Saturday and found my brother already there, his wife home with the kids, my father at the head of the dining room table like he was presiding over something official. My mother had made coffee. The good china was out. I noticed the china and felt something tighten in my chest. My father spoke first. He said that as a family, they felt it was time to formalize some things. That family support, implied support, he said, the kind that doesn't always get acknowledged, deserved recognition, that my brother had given me advice over the years that shaped my thinking, that my mother had helped me in ways I might not have even noticed, that they, as a unit, felt they were owed a stake in what I'd built. I sat very still. My brother slid a piece of paper across the table. It was not a formal legal document. It was a printed sheet with numbers on it, the kind of thing you make in Excel when you want something to look official without paying a lawyer. It outlined a proposed transfer of 30% of Fern Table's equity. 30%, to be split between my father and my brother, with my mother listed as a secondary beneficiary. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I said, "What support are you referring to, specifically?" My father gestured vaguely. "The years of specifically," I said again. There was a pause. My brother said I was being defensive. My father said this wasn't an accusation, this was a family conversation. My mother got up and refilled her coffee. I asked if they had receipts, invoices, records of any financial contributions to Fern Table. My brother said this wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement. My father said I'd been given a foundation and I was acting like I'd built something in a vacuum. I thought about the 401. I thought about the Tupperware of stuffing. I said I would think about it and drove home. I didn't think about it. I called my lawyer. Her name is Stephanie. She's been my business lawyer since I incorporated, and she has the specific quality I most value in a lawyer, which is that she sounds bored when she's most alert. She listened to everything I said without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "They have no legal basis for this. None. But you need to decide how you want to handle it socially, because that's the actual question here." She was right. The legal question was simple. The family question was not. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I went through my contracts, my incorporation documents, my BDC loan history. I made a folder on my desktop called Record, and I put everything in it. Every document that showed Fern Table had been built by me, financed by me, operated by me. Every lease, every payroll record, every invoice going back to 2019. Then I did something else. I called the property management company that handled the building on King Street, the building where my commercial kitchen was located. I had a conversation with them that, at the time, seemed routine. I'll come back to that. My brother texted 2 weeks after the Saturday meeting to ask if I'd thought about the proposal. I said yes, and I'd like to meet again, this time at my office. He said sure. I told him he could bring our father. I scheduled the meeting for a Thursday at 11 a.m. I had a corporate client consultation at 1 p.m. with 2 contacts from a Waterloo tech firm I'd been trying to sign for their annual staff appreciation lunch. 300 people, recurring quarterly contract. It was the most significant meeting I'd had in months, and I'd spent a week preparing for it. I want to be clear about this. I had not planned for what happened next. I had planned to have a direct conversation with my father and brother, to show them my documentation, and to end the discussion. What happened instead is that they arrived 25 minutes early and found their way into my kitchen space before my office manager could redirect them. And when I came out of my back office, I found my father and brother standing in the middle of my kitchen, looking around with a specific expression people wear when they're trying to reassess something they'd already dismissed. My father looked at the commercial refrigerators and the prep tables and the shelving units and the plating station, and then he looked at me and said, "This is a real operation." He said it like a compliment. He said it like he was surprised. My brother was holding his phone and I could see he was doing the math, the lease on this space, the equipment, the staff salaries he could see implied by the prep work underway, and his expression was changing in a way that told me the number he'd put on that Excel sheet was about to get revised upward. I showed them to my small meeting room. The corporate clients arrived at 5 to 1. My office manager, Paige, put them in the waiting area with coffee and the seasonal menu booklet. The meeting with my father and brother was still going. I knew it because my father had pivoted. He was no longer talking about acknowledgement or family foundations. He was talking about investment opportunity, about bringing in capital, about what Fern Table could be with the right backing. My brother was nodding. The number on the table had become 40%. I looked at my father across the table and I said very calmly, "Before we go further, you mentioned earlier that you know the building manager, that you could have a word with him about our lease." My father had said this about 10 minutes in, almost as an aside. The way people mention connections they believe give them leverage. He'd said he golfed with someone who knew the property management company's regional director and that a word in the right ear could make things very easy or very complicated for a small business. He had said this, and I had let it sit, and now I picked it up. "Call him," I said. My father blinked. "What? Call your contact, the one who knows the building management. Call him right now, put him on speaker, and ask him about our lease situation." My brother looked at me. My father looked at me. There was a silence that lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. My father picked up his phone. I think he believed he was calling a bluff. I think he'd spent so many years being the person whose confidence filled a room that it didn't occur to him that I might know something he didn't. He made the call. His contact answered. "Genuinely," the man answered, which I hadn't been entirely certain he would. My father said he was calling about the commercial property on King Street in Kitchener, about Fern Table, about the lease situation there. There was a pause on the other end, and then the man said, "Gerald, that property was sold privately 14 months ago. I can't do anything with that lease." My father said, "Sold to who?" Another pause. "To the current tenant. She bought it. She owns the building." The room was very quiet. I had purchased the building 14 months earlier when the previous owner, an older gentleman who was retiring and moving to the island, had offered me right of first refusal before listing. I'd worked with a mortgage broker, done the financing through a combination of business equity and a commercial mortgage, and closed without fanfare or announcement. It was my building. It had been my building for over a year. My father had just threatened to use his connections to pressure a building manager about a property his daughter owned. My brother set his phone face down on the table. My father said, "You own the building?" "Yes," I said. He said, "Since when?" 14 months, I said. My father looked at the wall. My brother looked at his hands. I looked at the door to the meeting room and thought about Paige and the corporate clients waiting outside with their coffee and their menu booklets, and I thought about the 401 and the Tupperware and the good china that came out for a conversation I was supposed to find flattering. I said, "I have a client meeting I need to get to. I'll walk you out." They left. I washed my hands in the kitchen sink, took a breath, and went to meet my clients. We signed the quarterly contract 3 days later. What followed was not clean or cinematic. Real consequences rarely are. My brother stopped texting. My father, and this was the part I hadn't anticipated, the part that went from painful to something I had to manage legally. My father started talking. He talked to family friends. He talked at his golf club. He said things about Fern Table that weren't true, that I'd had a silent partner who'd since walked away, that I'd gotten a government grant under false pretenses, that the business was in financial trouble. None of it was true. All of it was the kind of thing that spreads in the specific way that rumor spreads among people who want to believe it. Stephanie sent a cease and desist within 2 weeks of the first complaint reaching me through a second-hand contact. My father received it on a Tuesday. I know this because my mother called me crying on a Wednesday. My mother is complicated. She is not a cruel person, but she is a person who has spent 40 years preferring peace to honesty, which produces its own kind of damage. She cried and said she didn't understand why I was doing this to the family. I told her I wasn't doing anything to the family. I was responding to what was being done to my business. She said, couldn't I just let it go? I said no. She said she didn't know what I'd become. I said, as gently as I could, "Mum, I've been this person for a long time, you just didn't look." She hung up. She called back 4 days later. We have had a number of conversations since then that are careful and real in a way our conversations never were before, and I don't know yet what they're building toward, but I think she's trying. I'm trying to let her. My father issued a correction to the people he'd spoken to. Stephanie's letter had outlined clearly the legal exposure for defamation in Ontario and the documented timeline of Fern Table's finances and ownership. He didn't apologize. He issued a correction, which I understand is the version of an apology available to a man like him. My brother sent me an email in April. It was 3 sentences. He said he realized he'd handled things badly. He said he'd been thinking about what he actually knew about what I'd built versus what he'd assumed, and that there was a significant gap. He asked if we could talk sometime. I haven't responded yet. I'm not withholding to punish him. I'm taking the time I need to figure out what I actually want from a relationship with my brother. Whether the version we could build now is one worth building. That's a real question, and I haven't arrived at the answer. What I know is this. I built Fern Table in a city that didn't see me coming, for clients who found me because the food was good and the sourcing was honest, and the events were exactly what I said they would be. I built it while my family gathered at holidays and discussed my potential in the past tense. I bought the building on King Street because I intended to still be there in 20 years, and I wanted the ground under my feet to be mine. Nobody gave me a foundation. I poured it myself in November when the ground was cold, and I have the paperwork to prove it. That's not bitterness. That's just the truth. And it turns out the truth has always been the most useful thing I own. There's a version of that Thursday I used to replay, the one where I freeze or back down or apologize for owning something. I'm glad I don't live in that version. What I've come to understand, slowly and not without some cost, is that what happened in that meeting room wasn't really about money. My father didn't wake up one morning and calculate 30% of my equity. He woke up one morning and realized after years of not looking that I had built something real, and his first instinct was to attach himself to it. That instinct didn't come from nowhere. It came from a lifetime of assuming that my success, if it ever came, would naturally flow back toward the center of the family. Toward him. That's not villainy, exactly. It's a kind of smallness that masquerades as entitlement, and it does real damage whether it means to or not. I think about Paige, who put 2 clients with their coffee and their menu booklets in the waiting area while my father sat at my table and told me what I owed him. Paige didn't know what was happening in that meeting room. She just did her job, professionally, because that's who she is. And that steadiness, that ordinary competence, is something I've tried to build the whole culture of Fern Table around. People who show up. People who do what they said they would. I'd rather have 1 Paige than 10 people with connections and leverage and golf club memberships. What I know now that I didn't fully understand at 28, crying on the 401 with a container of leftover stuffing, integrity compounds. Not in a poetic, abstract way, in a practical, documentable way. Every invoice I filed, every lease I signed in my own name, every payroll record I kept, that wasn't just administration, that was the foundation of my defense when I needed one. Stephanie didn't have to build my case out of nothing. She had 14 months of ownership records and 5 years of clean financials to work with. The work I'd done, quietly, without an audience, was exactly what protected me when someone tried to use an audience against me. And the smear campaign. That's the part people don't always talk about in stories like this. It's not the dramatic confrontation that gets you, it's the quiet damage that follows. My father talking at his golf club, half-truths finding the right ears, that required something different from me. Not rage, not a press release, but patience and documentation, and the willingness to let Stephanie do what she does. The corrections spread through the same networks as the original story. That's how it works, when you've built real relationships with real people over real years. The ground holds. What I want for anyone sitting with a version of this, a family that underestimated you, a relationship where your competence was treated as an inconvenience, is not revenge, it's clarity. The moment my father heard she owns the building, he didn't lose power. He revealed that he'd never had any. That's not something I took from him. That's something that was always true, waiting to be seen. I poured the foundation myself, in the cold, without witnesses, without acknowledgement. That's not a complaint. That's just the condition under which most worthwhile things get built.